You people must be exhausted, huh? Having been sitting here and listening. Well, where were we now? We were trying to understand something. Very little we can understand, remember, of the revelation of God. It's beyond us. We can get impressions of it, but not really to understand it fully. We were trying to understand something of the greatness of this revelation, and therefore appreciate the power of the words which are revealed to us in this day by Baha'u'llah. And we were talking about the revelation, how it came to him, how with such forcefulness, with such rapidity, the words were revealed in this age, that the world has been filled with the great ocean. It's like an ocean, really, of revelation. You know, Baha'u'llah has revealed, as I said, the words with such rapidity that within 1 hour, 1,000 verses would have been revealed. To describe this for you and to show you the relationship of this revelation with the revelations of the past, we can look back and see the revelation of Islam, the revelation of the Quran. The Quran, which is the book of Islam, took 23 years to be revealed, and that is over 6,000 verses. Well, mankind needed only that. When the Bab appeared, his revelation was so much more profuse in pouring out his words that it took him 6 hours to reveal 1,000 verses. Now Baha'u'llah would reveal that in 1 hour. 6 times, almost 6 times faster than that of the Bab. It's very difficult to imagine what it is like to be placed in that time when revelation came to him. And when the revelation came to him, it was so powerful. The influence upon his own physical body was such that he says whenever revelation came to him, it was as if his body was put on fire. All the limbs of his body was put on fire. And this is why people could not fully look into his face at the time of revelation. They would be so overwhelmed if they did. There were so many people who tried to peep in the room where Baha'u'llah was revealing, and they could not stand it, and some of them fainted. Baha'u'llah would give permission to some of the followers, some of his disciples who begged to see the revelation, that he would allow them to come in. And they would come in and they would stand there for 1 or 2 minutes only. And then Baha'u'llah, with a movement of his hand, would dismiss them, which knew that they could not take it. And those people were so shaken during that experience. The experience was so much soul stirring that in one of his tablets, Baha'u'llah says, if man was not weak, if God had not created man as a weak creature, we are weak creatures really, in one sense. If man was not weak, we would have allowed all people to come and witness the revelation of the Word of God. But they cannot stand it. You see? So, for 40 years, in this way, divine revelation had been pouring upon mankind. And as I said, it has drowned this world in an ocean of revelation. And yet we have only a portion of that revelation in writing. A portion of it. Because there were so many days and nights in the life of Baha'u'llah that he poured out from his lips, the word of God, revealed so many things which were not recorded. When he was those years in the mountains of Kurdistan, all that was revealed was released into the air, into the open air. And that was all. For 2 years. And when Baha'u'llah came to Baghdad, Nabil mentions that for some years, every day and night, the equivalent of the Quran would have been revealed by Baha'u'llah within every 24 hours and not recorded. And even there came a time that Baha'u'llah ordered his secretary, at one stage in Baghdad, he was so disappointed from mankind and humanity and those people who were supposed to be his followers or followers of the Bab. He was so much distressed with their attitude and their condition that he asked his amanuensis, his secretary, to take a great portion of his writings, wash them and throw them into the river, saying mankind is not worthy of it in this age. So you see, it's a great, great ocean. And Abdul Baha has added to this yet further of his explanations and elucidations, and he has enriched the Baha'i, the writings of Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah has left behind about 15,000 tablets. And some of these tablets may be 1 page, some of them may be 100 pages, 50 pages. Abdul Baha has left behind something in the order of 26 or 27,000 tablets during the 29 years of his ministry. Again, the size of these tablets vary very much indeed. Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the faith, has left behind also something in the order of 26 or 27,000 letters, some of which were so lengthy that they merited to be published in the form of books. Such things as the advent of divine justice, the promised days come. These were letters of Shoghi Effendi. They were not books. The National Assembly of the United States decided to publish them and to give it a name and to put subtitles for it, as you've noticed. All these letters of the world order of Baha'u'llah which are included in that, each one of them is a letter. The only book that Shoghi Effendi wrote was God Passes By, which is a history of the 100 years of the faith. So you see how much information we have, how much guidance we have. You see, the world is full of it. And how all these writings have to be compiled and edited and indexed so that we can have access to it. Those of you who were there last night, I was mentioning how when I was a child, I used to hear from the Baha'is in Persia that how can we go and teach the faith all over the world with donkeys, because they had never seen any other form of transportation. They could not visualize anything else. And the answer was that God will create the means for it. God will create the means. And now we can see the means here. I mean, you travel with the speed of sound now, or double the speed of sound. So you see, when the faith needs it, it will be created for it. This communication which has come into being is in order that the message of Baha'u'llah may reach to all mankind. Without it, the faith of Baha'u'llah would have been really meaningless. To have a religion which is for the whole world and yet not being able to communicate. And as days goes on, and as the needs of the faith are more and more apparent, then God will create the means for it. I have mentioned this maybe to some of you. You may have heard me saying this. I believe firmly that every time that the faith goes through different stages of growth, and it's growing constantly. And as you need the means, it will be given to us. Some 30 years ago, when I was in Dublin, I wanted to make a telephone call to Tehran. And it took me 2 days to arrange it. Because you have to find out, you have to see who you're going to speak in Tehran with. You couldn't have a direct communication, a telephone. And that they would send a telegram to him, and he would come to the post office at a certain time, a certain hour, and we would go to the post office in our end, a certain time and a certain hour. And then by radio telephone, after 3 days of arrangement, we could speak together. Well, that was good enough. But today, the faith is moving with such force. The Baha'i world is becoming so active internationally. We have to be able to crisscross each other around the world. That you want to lift up your telephone at home and say to your friend, I'm coming, instead of today, I'm coming tomorrow. You have to be able to do it. And you see, the means are created for it. Always the means, as the faith grows, the means for its communications will grow with it. Otherwise we couldn't work. We could not have an international community if we did not have these simple facilities which we take it for granted. We couldn't. 30 years ago you could not have traveled from London to here. You may have traveled with great difficulties, probably. So many places and difficulties. 40 years ago, certainly you couldn't. And there was no need for a person like me or somebody to come from England to here. There was no need for it. We did not have this universal relationship. There was a time that the faith was local in its functioning. When I was a young person, the faith has a local characteristic. Although we knew it was for the whole of mankind and the world, but our vision would not go beyond our local communities, because we were cut off from the rest of the world, from the rest of the country even. In our little village, for instance, if only a person would go once a year to the capital, it would be considered as one of the greatest acts he had done, to go to the capital. And when he came back, he would be considered as a very special man who had been to the capital. We did not have newsletters coming in every month like this. We did not have any of these things. The faith was really having a local characteristic. We used to teach in our town. We had the tablets of Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha and the writings of Shoghi Effendi. Whenever it came, it would reach us. Occasionally, every 6 months, maybe we would hear something from the Central Assembly in Tehran. So you see, the faith was local in character. Our visions was local. And then, it was like this until Shoghi Effendi really gave us the vision of national consciousness. And this happened in the 1940s. In America, it started in 1937 when the first 7-year plan came. And then in here, they acquired a consciousness that you shouldn't be concerned with your own town, but that you should be concerned with the whole country. But in the rest of the world, it was in 1940s. The Shoghi Effendi gave plans to various countries. And in those days, there were 7 or 8 national assemblies only. And to these 7 or 8 national assemblies in the 1940s, Shoghi Effendi gave them a plan to extend their teaching activities in other towns. And the idea occurred to us that we can and we should communicate with each other. And then the national communication was such that we could go from one town to another. We had then cars coming in, we could travel from place to place, from one town to another. And we acquired gradually, until 1953, we acquired the national consciousness. The faith rose up from a local level into a national level. In every country in the world, people began to act as one nation. You could see that. People pioneered from one end of the country to the other to form local spiritual assemblies. And so he rose up from that state of local into national. And it wasn't until Shoghi Effendi launched a 10-year crusade with which he brought the whole world together. And it didn't happen right away. It happened 10 years later. In 1963, when we had this Jubilee celebrations in London, in the Albert Hall in London, when we realized we became an international community, we acquired a consciousness of international consciousness. Then it was the whole world. Baha'is began to travel from one end of the world to the other. We used to send pioneers from one country to another country, one end of the world to the other. But in the 1940s, it wasn't even conceivable that somebody could pioneer, say, from Persia to England. It was impossible to even think about it. You wouldn't think in such terms. If you wanted to pioneer, you would only go to a town in your own country. So you see how we raised from local into national into international community. And as we arose in these conditions, the world facilities, the physical facilities, rose with it. When we became an international community, we needed to communicate with each other on an international level. And gradually, these facilities were created for us. You know, I was talking about the writings of Baha'u'llah. I was saying how vast it is. I was talking about the writings of Abdul Baha, saying how vast they are. And the same thing with Shoghi Effendi's. But do you realize that during the lifetime of Shoghi Effendi, who was the guardian of the faith, none of these writings were indexed. None of them. None of them was in a form that you could try and say, I want on such and such a subject, what Baha'u'llah has said about this, that you could find it. All this great many writings, it was not indexed. And Shoghi Effendi did not need it to be indexed. He was divinely guided. You asked him a question and he would reply to you. He would say this means this and that means this and you should do this, you should do that. But when the House of Justice came into being, in 1963, it was a different story. The House of Justice realized that they could not work, they could not give guidance unless they knew what Baha'u'llah had said on that subject, what Abdul Baha had said about that subject, what Shoghi Effendi had said about that subject. But how were they going to find it? With all these writings of Baha'u'llah, which is an ocean, I described to you the immensity of the writings. How can they pass a resolution without looking at the writings? They couldn't. And so, the first thing they did was to have this research department established. And in this research department, the first thing they did, they began to index the writings of Shoghi Effendi. Or how they did it. I remember looking at the way they were working in those days, 1963. They would read a letter of Shoghi Effendi and they would see in one page there are 5 questions, 5 different subjects. Well, the ideal thing was to take 5 copies and put each one in a file. That's what you would do. Each one a different subject. Now, do you realize that perhaps you may be surprised to hear this, but something very simple nowadays we have, and it's called a photocopier. Well, that machine became available commercially just at the time that the House of Justice came into being. Before that, it didn't exist. And if we didn't have that simple, straightforward machine, how would you be able to copy 26,000 letters, each page 5 times? You know, put it in their files. Impossible. It came just in time. Didn't come at the time of Shoghi Effendi. We didn't need it. But as we needed it, it came into being. And I remember when they were making these indexes, someone told me, he said, we have got now 500 subjects on a master index. They're card indexes. 500 subjects. How can you remember them? How can you know which is which? You will forget it tomorrow, what you have written on the first page. The mind could not conceive it, could not take it. And then came the computer. It took over. And now you go and ask them, you go and ask a question. I want to know what Shoghi Effendi has said about that subject, what Baha'u'llah has said about that subject. You just ask them, and this is what the House of Justice does. As soon as you ask a question from the House of Justice, they will ask their research department to see what Shoghi Effendi has said about it, if any. What Abdul Baha has said about it, if any. And with the press of a button, you get the answers where to look for them. And it is copied, put in front of the members of the House of Justice. They know now what is involved. Do you see how, as the faith needs it, things will come for us? Now, how can you imagine the House of Justice could have worked in any other way? How could they give guidance in an ocean of writings without these facilities? But these facilities were not here at the time of Abdul Baha. These facilities were not here at the time of Shoghi Effendi. They came into being just in time. And I can assure you that as time goes on, and as the speed of the growth of the faith increases, and when great numbers come into the faith, and we are going to be faced with complexities of administration, which we now cannot even imagine how we're going to handle it, facilities will be created for us. The world, all these things will be solved. God will create the means. I told you this yesterday. This is what I remember I heard this when I was 8 years of age. When the believers could not imagine they can travel throughout the world on donkeys. And they had never seen a bicycle even. They couldn't visualize any form of transportation. And they were asking, how can we go? And the answer was, this is the cause of God. It will create the means for it. And now, it will create the means for everything we need. Well, friends, we have seemingly gone away from our subject quite a long way back. We have to bring you back again. We were talking about reading the words of God in the morning and in the evening. Do you remember that? Or have you forgotten it? Yes. Well, if we read the words in that spirit that I mentioned, and knowing that the power is latent within these words, then it will influence our hearts. We must also know, going back to the Word of God again, that the Word of God is creative. Everything which is uttered by the manifestation of God, it operates, it becomes effective. Even whatever that word may be, I will give you an example of this. Over 100 years ago, when Baha'u'llah was living in a tiny little room in a house in Akka. Some of you have already been on pilgrimage. You have seen the little house of Udi Khammar, which is part of the house of Abud. Now, there is a little room in which they tell you that he revealed here the Kitab-e-Aqdas, the most holy book. There is nothing in this revelation greater than the revelation of the Kitab-e-Aqdas. This is one thing you can be sure of. There is nothing greater than this revelation of the Kitab-e-Aqdas. Of all the writings of Baha'u'llah, this one stands out. And in this book, Baha'u'llah wrote 4 or 5 lines. Can you imagine writing 4 or 5 downs in that small, depressing little room? And in that 4 or 5 lines, this is what he said. He said, in every locality, in every town, establish a house of justice in my name. And 9 people should, or more, should become members of this. Or something to this effect. I'm paraphrasing his words. And he did not write any more about it, or press us, or push us, or keep on reminding us about it. He just wrote those few lines, and he went. Now, look at what those few lines have done to the world in our communities. Look at what it has done. Tens of thousands of families have left their homes, have given up their jobs, have sacrificed everything they had, have gone to the most inhospitable parts of the world. Why did they do that? They went there in order to fulfill these words of Baha'u'llah. As pioneers to form local spiritual assemblies, which are the nucleus of those houses of justice, which Baha'u'llah has ordered. You see the creativity of the word? And now we have about 30,000 of these institutions. 30,000 of them. And we are not going to stop here and say, well, this is a difficult job. And really it is. It's the most difficult job. To form assemblies. You realize this. We are not going to say, well, look, this is too much. Let us drop it. We have enough. Let us do all the other teachings of Baha'u'llah, but not this one. We are not going to say that. On the contrary. We're going to continue and continue and continue until such time that every locality on the surface of this earth will have its house of justice. You see the creativity of the word now? Without forcing anybody? People give their lives for establishing local spiritual assemblies today. These are not words, it's the truth. People have given their lives for the establishment of these institutions. So much sacrifice have gone into it that if you study the history of the building up of these institutions, which have been brought about by pioneering movements all over the world, people of all colors and classes and races, not that they are all Europeans or Americans or Persians who do this. Peoples of all colors and classes and backgrounds, speaking all kinds of languages. They have arisen with the same spirit to promote this principle. This very 4 lines in the Kitab-e-Aqdas. That's all they're doing. You see now the creativity of the word, how the word of God is created, penetrates into the hearts. Now so when we recite the words in the morning and in the evening, we must remember these things. We must remember it's the word of our Creator. We must remember the way it was revealed. We must remember that these words are creative. We must remember that these words penetrate into the hearts. It has infinite significances and meanings and powers within it. And then, of course, it will affect us. And also, above all, we must look at that great ocean. Never leave it out of our sight. You remember the story of the drop on the ocean? We must always look at the greatness of that ocean of revelation, and then we become humble. And then these words will penetrate into our hearts. And so when we read the words, when I read the words, when you read the words, in the morning, recite them, and then you go to your work, we will remember it. We must remember it. And when you are dealing with business, in your business, whatever it is, from time to time, let the thought of Baha'u'llah come to your mind. Let it flash into your mind, Baha'u'llah, his words that you have read this morning. Just flash it. It comes as a flash in your mind. And it becomes like a sharp electric impulse in our bodies. And even the man who is looking at you, who is not a Baha'i, he could notice a difference in you. There is something happens. You just are a different person. You've just been in communing with him in that instant, without interfering with your work. And so you see, in this way, the food is being digested now. What we have read will penetrate into our hearts. And then you become hungry when you get home to read more of the words of God. When we started this sort of discussions and talks in some European countries, especially in Ireland that I live there, and the Irish people are very, very spiritual people. Very spiritual people. They took it to heart. And one of them asked a question, a very genuine question. He said, look, in the mornings, I have in such a rush to go to my work. I can't read the writings. And of course you realize this. The Baha'u'llah says you must read it in the morning and in the evening. If I don't read it in the morning, and then the evening comes, I have, as if I've gone out without my breakfast, spiritual breakfast. And I'm afraid Baha'u'llah had not said that it doesn't matter if you didn't read it in the morning, it doesn't matter, lump them together and read it one go. It says in the morning and in the evening, I'm sorry. And there is a reason for it, is, as I mentioned today, it's that these words may penetrate into our hearts. Just like food that you eat, you have the food in the morning, you have to take the food in the evening. So, it's very important. When I go to my office and I'm very busy and I have not read the words in the morning, and then the morning comes and goes, and then when I go home, I've missed reading the writings. And they said, what are we going to do? Because some people said, we can't do it in the mornings. We can't get up earlier. There we are. And we are tired in the mornings. You know, some people stay very late nights for some reason. And then in the mornings they can't get up. I've seen many of them like that. Especially in summer schools it's like this. Always the classes in the morning is absolutely empty. And people, to such an extent that I know in some countries they have come to the conclusion that classes in the morning shouldn't start until 11:30. They just can't help it. No matter what they do, people are staying till 3 in the morning, 4 in the mornings, having all kinds of fun and talks and late night sessions. And somehow people like late night sessions, as we call them, you know, which is informal, sitting together and talking, and then the official lectures. So, now, what are we going to do, he said. He said, I'm tired in the mornings. No time. Well, the idea came, why not take a book with you to your office? You can't let this day pass without reading the words. So take a book with you, one of the writings of Baha'u'llah. And so it became customary for some people to take the hidden words with them. And then they find 10 minutes to sit down at some place and read it. You see, this is important to be serious about it. And to be regular. It's no use to read it this week and then next week saying, oh yes, we must read every day. I read last week one passage, I read one passage this week. You know, it's just saying I've eaten my food last month and I'm going to have another feed today. You know, Baha'u'llah has said every morning and every evening. And he said, if you don't read it, you are not faithful to the covenant of God. I tell you a story. 2 months ago, we were in Paris. And we were staying with some friends. My wife and family, and we were all staying with some friends. We had an Irish young lady who we knew she was in Paris also. And we invited her to come and stay that night with us so that we could see her. Oh, she said, I would love to come. But she said, I'm in town now. I can't go home. I have no pajamas to bring with me. I have no toothbrush. Oh, these people said, we'll give it to you. Doesn't matter. Come on in. She said to me, you know, there is another problem. Now all of this happening to visiting. I said, what's the problem? She said, these people we are staying with, they have no English books. No. She said, I must read the writings tonight and tomorrow morning. I have no books with me. Have you got an English book that you can give it to me of the writings of Baha'u'llah for tonight and tomorrow morning? So that she could come and stay. You see now how serious it is? This is how they have taken it to their hearts. And now the faith is growing there. With beautiful qualities of people coming into the faith. Now, all of this is really because we are turning to Baha'u'llah, obeying him, his teachings, obedience. If he is the voice of God, then he deserves, he must be obeyed. Obedience. So now, so much about reciting the words in the morning and in the evening. And you know why we said all this about reciting the words in the morning and in the evening? Why this? How this came about? You remember? We were talking about the soul. We talked about the spirit of faith being born. This morning we talked about how the spirit of faith is born. How our soul becomes pregnant, becomes fertilized by the influences of the revelation of Baha'u'llah, and how it will give birth to the spirit of faith. And then we said, now that you have given birth to, like a mother who has given birth to a child, you have to feed it. That's why we talked about so much about reading the writings of Baha'u'llah. And we also, I want to remind you again, there's a great difference between the writings, like tablets of Baha'u'llah, and his prayers. Prayers are different things, and writings are different things. And we said this morning how opposite of each other they are. You remember that. Now, I want to go a little further. It's not only that we should read the writings and then everything will be fine. You have to do other things. Just as I said this morning, we have to, in order to live, you have to do a lot of things together. You have to eat, you have to sleep, you have to cook, you have to shop, you have to wear clothes, you have to do a lot of things to live. And it's the same thing in the faith. You have to do a lot of things together. The other subject that I want to bring up now, that is a subject which may be foreign to many of us. And I'll mention it frankly, it may be foreign to so many of us who come from the Christian background. Reading the writings is not foreign. Saying prayers is not foreign. But one of the laws of Baha'u'llah is the saying of obligatory prayers. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about this obligatory prayer so that you can see what it is. It is not just a prayer. This is something you must remember. It's not just a prayer. You cannot put it on the same level as ordinary prayers that we have. In the original language, there is a special word for it, which is different from prayer. But because there is no word in English to translate it into, it has been translated in this form of calling it obligatory prayer, to indicate it's an obligation to perform that rite. It's a Baha'i rite. It's the ritual. See, the faith is not without rituals. We have some rituals. But the only thing is this, these rituals are not man-made. These rites are given to us by Baha'u'llah. The saying of obligatory prayers is a religious rite. And it is a law of Baha'u'llah. And if there is a choice of saying the obligatory prayers, if you have a choice to say the obligatory prayer today or read the writings, the obligatory prayers have precedence. And it's very beautiful. You see, God has not forbidden, has not withheld from us all the pleasures of the world. You must not think that Baha'u'llah has come to stop us having pleasure. All the pleasures of this world, you can enjoy it, and it is for you, but you have to do it in the right way. Baha'u'llah mentions the idea of detachment is not to become a poor man and a mendicant or live an ascetic life. You can, he said, have all the good things of this world. He said, in fact, all the good things of this world, in one of his tablets he mentions, all the good things of this world is created for the loved ones of God. It's all created for you. But he says, do not become attached to them. Do not make them to rule you, to rule over you. But you can have them. He says, if you can eat in vessels of gold, eat vessels of gold. But don't become attached to them. Don't let them become your master. So you see, the idea of detachment is so different from what people think. When you say detach yourself from the things of this world, some people think now this means you have to become careless, you have to give up the world. And this is against the teachings of Baha'u'llah. He has never told us to desert the world. He says, in fact, he says, engage yourself in all the work and the professions. And he says, your work is service. Your work is worship of God when you are working. So you see that? How much the view of detachment is different from what we understand it. Now that I'm talking about detachment, let me go a little bit further about this, because this is a subject which we often talk about. We often talk about this. In the writings you hear more and all the time telling us that you have to be detached from the things of this world. To be detached does not mean, as I said, to become careless, to give up the world and become poor. In fact, sometimes poor people are much more attached to the world than rich people. You know, sometimes poor people are much more attached to than the rich people. There is a story in Persian of a king and a dervish. Maybe you have heard that story. It's a Persian story. And the king and the dervish, the dervishes are supposed to be, now they're supposed to be renounced. They have renounced the world and they are detached, and in fact they have nothing. And they have really, that's one thing, they have nothing. And they go around and they have got a little basket. And they carry this basket around with them, so that as they go around, people would just put a little bit of food in these baskets for them. And they sleep anywhere that they come across. You see how much this is against the teachings of the faith? Although they think this is detachment. This is very much against the teachings of the faith to do this. Anyhow, it was supposed to be, this man was supposed to be so detached from the things of this world that the king became very fond of this idea. And he invited this dervish to his palace. And then they stayed together for some time there, and he taught them a lot of lessons about detachment. And the king became very, very much of a convert to this idea. And he said, well, I'll become like you. And so the king disguised himself in the garb of a dervish, left the palace, and they both of them left the palace and went on wandering. You know, just this is what they do. They wander around. And after a mile that they'd gone, suddenly the dervish, in horror, he found out that he has left behind his basket in the palace of the king. And he said, oh, this is terrible. We have to go back and get our basket. I can't go without it. The king said to him, I have left behind my palaces, and you were attached to your little miserable basket, you see. Which is true. Now you see, really, detachment has nothing to do with riches or with poverty. Although Baha'u'llah says, and so in other religions, that if you're a very rich man, it's difficult to be detached. But if you become detached, when you are in a position of wealth and other things, then your station is very high indeed. But really, detachment. Again, I think I was mentioning it some time ago to the friends here. One evening we were together, and I mentioned the meaning of detachment as far as I understand it. I'll repeat it for you here. You know, every person, all of us, by nature, we are very possessive people. By nature, man is possessive. We want to possess things. We want to own things. We want to own our own things. And as you go around, you go and always add things to your collections. We are collectors. You have a house, you have a business, you have money, you want to add to it, you go out, you find something beautiful, a beautiful painting, you add to it, this is your collections. You bring it home. And we gather these things all around us. This is true, really and truly. I suppose if somebody looks down upon us from the spiritual worlds of God, who have passed from this state of attachment, they will be amazed how we are gathered things around us, you know. It's like these little creatures who store their food, you know, and they are protecting it with their lives. We are really very queer people. This is the way man is. This is the way God has created us. What can you do? This is the animal in us. We are possessive. And we are the master in this. You know, the master always stands in the middle and all our things revolve around us. We are the most important thing. And everything revolves around it. Everything beautiful you buy, you add to your collections. Until one day, you come across the faith. And you say, this is a very beautiful thing. This is the most beautiful thing I've got. And then you add it to your collections. Yes, you are in the middle, and all the things revolve around you, your house, your business, your family, your possessions, and your faith. You see? You have an hour for your hobbies, you have an hour for your family, you have so many hours for your work, and you have an hour for the faith. Well, such a man is attached to the things of this world. He is not detached. You see? He's not detached. He is attached. Because he pays the same attention to his house, or much more maybe, than to his faith. But if you put the faith in the middle of your life as a pivot, as an axis of our life, and then we and our possessions revolve around it, then you are detached. You still can keep your possessions. But the faith is first in your life. This is really a practical way of knowing what is attachment and what is detachment. And so that when the challenge comes to us, and always challenges come to the Baha'is, to arise and serve the faith. When the challenge comes to us, then we know what to give, how much of our possessions to give, how much of our time to give. And you will give all your time if necessary, because the faith is first in your life. And if I want to move my home and go to some other town, I'll find out whether the faith is going to benefit from it, or whether the faith is going to be harmed by it. And then I'll do according to what the faith means. This is really a criterion for finding out whether one is attached or one is not attached to the things of this world. And I will mention one form of attachment which is the most formidable and the most harmful and the most difficult maybe. It is not attachment to things. It is attachment to our own self. The ego. Attachment to our own self. This is the most dangerous form, and it will take probably a lifetime to get rid of it. A lifetime. It needs spiritual battles that we have to fight always within us to subdue the self. The self is the greatest enemy we have. And I don't want you to mix up the self of man with the soul. The self is what is the animal self. Is the force within us which drives us towards animal nature. That is the self. And we have to always be in a position to have a rein on that dangerous animal. And whenever it raises its head, just put it back in its place. This is where we have to be always in control. I will give you an example of what I mean by this, our own self. I'll give you an example of this. And I will give you an example of one of those, the local spiritual assemblies are places where we are all tested when we go into it. And when we sit there, we will be tested. That's a marvelous testing arena for Baha'is. We are tested all the time, perhaps, and we are not aware of it. Now, I'll give you an example of what self means. An attachment to self means we become attached to our opinions. I love my opinion. It's my views. It is my views. It's very important, And I give my views. And if it is not accepted, I'll be upset. And if it is accepted, I'll be delighted. And I will go around and say, this was my idea. I was mentioning yesterday, the word I and my is really a very ugly thing in the faith, in life. This is my idea. But really, a person who is selfless is a person who gives his ideas and he forgets about it. Really forgets about it now. Not to just say outwardly forget about it, but really. And so that if your idea was put forward, and if they said, what a marvelous idea it is, we are going to write to the House of Justice and say this person's ideas have been so marvelous that I don't feel, oh great, now I'm elated and I'm exalted, this is my idea. Now as soon as you think in your heart, that way, be sure we are attached to our own self. This is the attachment to our own self. One example of it. Or if they came back and said, this was a terrible idea, this man's ideas is horrible. Every time he comes, he gives us terrible ideas. Okay. One should not be affected by it. You just have given your ideas, you forget about it. Because in this faith, now nobody is telling us that we should suppress our views. I'm not saying that. In a local assembly, we have to give our views frankly, and if you found that your friends did not understand you, you have to give them another explanation of it and explain to them. But once you give it in, once you give your ideas, it's no longer yours. You have to forget it. This is selflessness. Now, this was just an example of what self is. This I is the self. And in this faith, Baha'u'llah in this day and age has removed from us, from our midst, anything which would compel people or make people to become, to have a position so that they will become, they will go around and throw their weight around, as they say. There is no such a thing in the faith. This is one of the great bounties of God, that Baha'u'llah has completely eradicated the idea of personalities. The great station that we have, as I said yesterday, really is that of servitude. A real servant is very great and beautiful. A real servant is the most beautiful thing, the most exalted thing we can do. And a real servant will never want him to be exalted. As soon as you get him exalted, it's not nice. And I think that we have to learn these things as time goes on from the writings. I mentioned that yesterday. I'm not going to repeat it. And here we come to another one of those teachings of Baha'u'llah, which not until we carry it out can we do anything proper. And that is to love one another. To love one another. Now you see, you cannot force yourself to love somebody, can you? And it's no good to do that either. It's a worst thing. It's a bad thing to do. It's better not to do it if it is artificial. I know, we all understand this. Love must come from the heart. But it is easy to love people you like. It's not easy to love people you don't like. And we must also be practical. In all these communities, there are people who do something to you which you don't respond positively to. You feel irritated sometimes, maybe. I don't know. And that is why we come to dislike people. I'm talking to you frankly. Now, how can we love that person that you dislike or you don't like so much? And not until we are able to love him can we do anything in this life, in this faith. Nothing. You read the writings all day, you say your prayers every day, you carry out all the teachings of Baha'u'llah, but if you don't love the friends with all your heart, you don't love each other, then things will not go forward. We become frustrated, we become unhappy, even though I read the writings every day. Now, I must make a note of some of these things that comes to my mind. Now, I will tell you an incident which happened to me some years ago. And that might explain what I'm trying to say. Some years ago, I was walking in a very crowded street in London. Very crowded. Thousands of people pass you every minute. And these people don't mean much to you because you don't even take notice of them, as if they are not there. And then suddenly, I noticed across the road, on the other side of the street, there was a man who used to come to our firesides years before. He was not a Baha'i, but he used to come to our firesides. And as soon as I saw that man, my heart jumped for him. And I said to myself, look at this crowd. None of them probably know about Baha'u'llah, but that man has heard the name of Baha'u'llah, and this is marvelous. The distinction. I could see the distinction. He has heard the name of Baha'u'llah many a times. He is distinguished in my sight from the rest of them who haven't heard it. To hear the name of Baha'u'llah is a great privilege, a great distinction. You see now? Now how much more is the position of a person who says, I am a Baha'i? Can you see the station of this person? Forget about his doings. Forget about all the things he does which run against your grain and upset you. But look at what he has. He is a Baha'i. Now when I say he is a Baha'i, what does it mean really? I can only talk about myself. Do you know really and truly, and I mean this, I cannot say I am a Baha'i, except I'm related to him by name. It's just a name. It's just that I'm attached myself to his name. I cannot say I am a Baha'i, truly. Impossible to say that. But by name, I am attached to him. And that is a distinction. Who cares what I do and what my life is? Who is not perfect? Who is perfect? We all have our shortcomings. But this person has a trace of Baha'u'llah in him. Just a name. And that is a great distinction. You compare him with the rest of mankind, he stands far above it. Now look into his face in that way. Don't look at his problems and shortcomings that you might see, because you look into his face and see a trace of Baha'u'llah, and then you love him. I can assure you, you will love him because of Baha'u'llah, because of his attachment by name to him. And then you can embrace him without even knowing what his name is. then you will never see the wrong things. And as soon as something happened that you disliked, you remember that. We are all full of shortcomings. This is a very important principle, really. And this is the meaning of humility. This is the meaning of servitude. Meaning of servitude is not to come in and bow before each other. But the meaning of servitude is to look into each other's faces and see a trace of Baha'u'llah. And then you love that person. And you become united with him. And then we have a sin-covering eye. I don't want to see the bad things. No, you don't want to see the bad things in me. Don't see it that way. And if, of course, somebody does something which harms the faith through his actions, which brings disgrace upon the faith, then it is our function to inform the institutions of the faith and say, look here, this person is doing something which is very bad. And then it is for the institutions of the faith to help him to overcome his problems. And if he didn't, well, they might even say to him, you can't remain in the faith. Okay, that is not for me to do that. But as an individual, we have to have a sin-covering eye. And to see in every face a trace of Baha'u'llah. There definitely is. And that's what makes every person so beautiful, really. It's that which makes every person so beautiful. And so distinguished. You read the writings and see what the station he has destined for a true believer. Someone who is attached by name in the sight of God. You remember what Christ said? He said, when the man came to him, his disciples, and said to him, my father is dead, can I go and bury him? He said, leave the dead to bury their dead. Means all the people in his sight who had not faith were dead. Now this is not in any way to indicate that we have to look down upon people. Far from it. And go out and say, oh, you're dead, you're no good. No, far from it. When you become a Baha'i, you realize all your shortcomings. I will recognize my own shortcomings. As soon as you become a Baha'i, you can find out you're full of shortcomings. All the shortcomings come to light. Those of you who were here, I was talking about it yesterday, saying that when the lamp lights up, when the light is there, you see, when I look into this light, can I see anything bad in it? No. You can see all the light. But I'm sure if you go very close to it, if you switch it off, they're full of dust. But you won't see the dust. This is how we should look into the faces of the friends. See a little bit of Baha'u'llah, and that will overlook. You can then overlook. You won't see anything else. Really, you won't see anything else. Everybody has good qualities, marvelous qualities. And one of the things that we have to learn to do is to encourage each other. Is to encourage, the local assemblies should encourage the friends. The friends should encourage their friends. Encouragement is very important for our institutions to encourage the believers. And encouragement must be genuine. Really, if you ever come across a friend, a Baha'i who is disenchanted or who is not coming to the meetings or has got some problem, be sure that what has happened is that no one has encouraged him. He needs encouragement. I'll give you an example, a story of this. And this is a very beautiful story I heard from one of our auxiliary board members in Britain. This woman is a teacher. And she teaches difficult children. All the rebellious type children are brought to her class. You know, children who nobody can manage them. When they come in, they really disturb everything. And she is in charge of this. In big schools, there is a problem. Often you come across children who no teacher can handle. Well, she tells us how she works with them. She said, I must find something good in them and then encourage them. That's the only way, he said, I can harness them. This is a very, very wise thing. This is how the faith has grown also. This is how Shoghi Effendi always, and Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha encouraged something. They saw something in you which was good, and that thing they elaborated on and encouraged. Because encouragement must be genuine. You cannot go and falsely encourage.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to listen to more content on the Oneness Movement, be sure to subscribe and leave a comment. See you next time.